Fly into almost any Chinese city. Look down, and you see the same thing. Towers. Thousands of them. Gray, identical, packed shoulder to shoulder all the way to the horizon. Land, walk around, and the pattern holds. The middle class lives in towers. The poor live in towers. Even in small towns, far from any crowd, families are stacked 30 floors in the air. Wherever you're watching this, that is probably not how you picture home. And it's worth sitting with how strange it is, because a country of 1.4 billion lives this way almost top to bottom. The highest rate of high-rise living on Earth. Here's how unusual that is. Chinese students abroad even joke about it. They call America and Canada the villages, because next to China's wall of towers, a whole developed country can look like one big small town. Now think of the broke kids in Japanese cartoons. Sakuragi, in Slam Dunk, is an orphan so poor he counts out 30 yen for shoes and runs a tab at the ramen shop, and he lives in a detached house. Nobita, in Doraemon, has one working parent, a junior office clerk, and his family has a house with a yard, with trees and flowers, in Tokyo, one of the most expensive cities on Earth. In Japan, the ordinary home sits on the ground. The easy answer is that China is crowded. It's the first thing everyone reaches for. It's also wrong. China ranks around 70th in the world for population density, less crowded than Britain, than Japan, than South Korea. Shanghai holds about 3,900 people per square kilometer. Toronto, a city full of houses, holds 5,200. And Tokyo's core is denser still. Yet a fifth of Tokyo lives in detached homes. The pattern even holds in small Chinese cities with almost nobody in them. And still, no houses. And here's the clue that cracks it open. China is not the only country that lives like this. Go to Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, almost anywhere the Soviet Union once reached. People live in towers there too, and Russia is one of the emptiest countries on Earth. So the tower has nothing to do with running out of land. It is something governments decide to build. The real question is why? And the answer for the Soviet world and the answer for China today are not the same. Follow the blueprint backward, and it leads to Moscow. The modern apartment tower was born in America, New York's Dakota, in 1884, the first elevator high-rise. A year later, Chicago raised the first steel-framed skyscraper. The race went global. A tower in Tokyo by 1890, in Paris by 1903, in Liverpool by 1911, in Shanghai by 1929. For decades, the tower was a private flex, insurance firms and corporations building monuments to themselves. Then Stalin made it a government project and turned the Skyline into a weapon. In 1931, he had Moscow's grandest cathedral dynamited, and on the rubble, he planned the Palace of the Soviets, forward 16 meters, a giant statue of Lenin on top, taller than the Empire State Building, the tallest thing humans had ever built. Socialism, he said, had to be visible. The war stopped it. The steel frame was ripped up for the front, and the foundation became the largest open-air swimming pool in the world. After the war, he built the Seven Sisters to out Skyline, New York. They were monuments, and they housed almost no one. But monuments don't house people, and the Soviet Union had a housing emergency. It had pulled millions of villagers into the cities to run its new factories and crammed them 8 to a room. Before Stalin died, the average Moscow resident had under 5 square meters of space, less than under the last czar. Khrushchev's fix is the building China would inherit. He ordered housing that was fast and cheap, prefab concrete panels, trucked in and snapped together like Lego. He capped them at 5 floors, because a 6th would legally require an elevator, and elevators cost the state money. They called it the Khrushchevka. It worked. Moscow's living space doubled. It was also grim. Thin walls, low ceilings, tiny kitchens, a walk-up that punished the old. That's the Soviet engine. Stack workers fast, stack them cheap, and make the future look like concrete. In 1953, China launched its first 5-year plan, leaned hard toward Moscow, and imported the model wholesale. Here's the part that gets forgotten. The tower was never Chinese tradition. Before 1949, city people lived on the ground. Courtyard homes in the north, lane houses in the south, each with a door to the street. China even had the technology for height. Shanghai's 24-story Park Hotel, finished in 1934, was the tallest building in Asia. People just didn't live stacked. The Chinese version was stripped down even further, up to 7 floors, and often one kitchen and one toilet shared between several families. It came as welfare housing, handed out by your work unit. For about 40 years, that was the whole reason China built towers. A poor socialist state copying a Soviet template to house workers fast. 3 generations grew up inside those buildings, which is why, to most Chinese, the tower simply feels normal. By rights, that engine should have switched off as China got rich. Instead, China built more towers than the entire rest of the world combined. Because in 1994, a second engine fired up. In 1994, Beijing rewrote how taxes are split between the central government and the provinces. The center pulled the big revenues up to itself and left the bills with local governments. Roads, schools, pensions, hospitals. Local officials got the responsibilities without the money to pay for them. So Beijing offered one way out: the land. In China, the state is the only legal seller of urban land. A local government could lease it to developers and keep the cash. This became land finance. In 1998, a housing reform under Premier Zhu Rongji ended the old system of handed-out welfare housing and fired the starting gun on a private market. From there, it grew fast. By 2020, land sales and land-backed borrowing funded roughly half of many local governments' budgets, and in some cities, at the peak, far more. The land had become the goose that laid the golden egg, and the whole job of governing a city turned into keeping its price high. In Beijing, the price of a square meter climbed from around 2,000 yuan in 2000 to 60 or 70,000 by 2019, and on a typical sale, roughly 70% of that price ends up with the government. It bred its own folk economics, the mother-in-law economy, where no marriage gets a blessing without an apartment first, and a single down payment can drain 3 generations. 6 wallets, as the saying goes, for one set of keys. To make land pay, you build up, and one number controls that: the plot ratio, how much total floor space you're allowed to stack on a piece of ground. A villa might sell for 5 times the price per square meter of an apartment, but a tower puts far more than 5 times the floor space on the same plot. Build up, and the land underneath is worth more. In 2024, 2 plots sold in the same district of Urumqi, a 14-minute drive apart. The high plot ratio plot went for 12,000 yuan a square meter. The low one, the kind you'd build houses on, went for 3,690. So cities quietly stopped approving low-rise in their best locations. Shenzhen and Shanghai worked this out around 2005 and never looked back. Chinese families can physically live in city houses. The land system makes sure those houses almost never get built. Once land is the budget, governing becomes price management. Economists even have a name for the logic. Li Hongbin and Zhou Lian called it the promotion tournament. Chinese officials rise through the ranks on the GDP growth they deliver, and the fastest way to grow GDP is to push the value of land as high as it will go. So they do, in 4 moves. 1. Manufacture scarcity. Release only a few plots a year, even when far more land is developable, so buyers bid each other up. Ren Zhiqiang, an outspoken state firm developer later jailed for 18 years, argued that Beijing was never short of land. Its built-up area covered only a fraction of what could be developed. And state-owned firms whose property arms barely turned a profit would still win the record-breaking Land King auctions, bidding the price up on the government's behalf. 2. Build infrastructure that lifts nearby land. Local financing vehicles, the shadow banks of China's local governments, borrow against land, then run subways, roads, and rail. The payoff isn't the fare. It's the jump in the surrounding land value. Sometimes just publishing a subway map is enough to move prices. 3. Crank the plot ratio, from 2 to 4 to 6. The result stands in complexes where towers are 8 meters apart and sunlight never reaches the lower floors. One such project was named, without irony, Sunshine City. And then, the strangest move of all. The state does sell land for villas, but only the remote, hard-to-sell plots on the edge of nowhere. It packages the dream of a house, sells it where the land was nearly worthless anyway, and keeps every prime downtown lot for towers. In China, the villa lives in the wilderness. 4. The move that locks you in. Tie public services to property. In China, how much of a city you can use depends on where you own a home, through the hukou, the household registration system. Rent in Beijing for 30 years, and your child still can't take the college entrance exam there. They're sent back to compete in their home province. Pay identical pension contributions for a lifetime, and a non-local can retire on 30 to 60% less, because payouts follow your registration. Healthcare reimbursements and housing loans run lower too. Even a Beijing native without a property loses the school district lottery to a neighbor who owns one. It follows you to the very end. At the funeral home, a non-resident can pay up to 10 times the local rate. The home does more than shelter you. It admits you to the city. Stacking people in towers does more than raise land prices. It quietly reshapes how the whole country lives. Critics argue that's by design. Take cars. A house in the suburbs means longer trips and a driveway, so you buy one. A tower next to a subway means you don't. China has about 250 cars per 1,000 people. Mexico has 391. Russia, 397. Malaysia, 542. China sits near Ukraine, below Thailand. The cage even saves the government money. Houses sprawl, so they need highways to connect them, and hospitals and schools spread across more ground. Pack everyone into towers on public transit, and the state builds less and serves more. Cheaper infrastructure, faster commutes, fewer clinics for the same crowd. The crush at a Chinese hospital is, in part, a planning choice. In a planned economy, even desert sand can be made expensive. The scarcity is manufactured. Appliances, furniture, all the spending that fills a big home, compress it into 90 square meters, and you simply buy less. The standard was never comfort. It was the most a family could be made to endure. 80 to 120 square meters, and not a meter more. As long as land is the budget, rising income doesn't turn into bigger homes. It turns into higher prices. Grow GDP another 30%, and you get housing that costs 30% more, not 30% more room. Incomes finally stalled out around 2021, and prices stalled with them, which tells you exactly what they had been tracking all along. Here's the part that should unsettle the planners. The country that invented the tower has spent 50 years escaping it. After the war, the US and Europe fell for the same idea. The architect Le Corbusier had sold it as a utopia. Machines for living in, towers set in open parkland. They mass-built it. Britain, France, the Netherlands, Sweden. Then they watched it fail. Jane Jacobs called the result housing warehouses. In 1972, the city of St. Louis dynamited the Pruitt-Igoe project. A critic wrote that modern architecture died that afternoon. The Danish urbanist Jan Gehl drew a rule from it. Only below the 3rd floor can people stay connected to the life of the street. Above 5 or 6, they drift away from it. 3 floors is about the height of a house, and towers carry a hidden bill. Maintenance cost doesn't rise in a line, it compounds. Over decades, aging high-rises turn into a city's liability, concrete that costs more to keep than it's worth. China's own academician Kui Kai, one of its top architects, calls these fast, standardized towers short-life buildings and a coming negative asset. Those warnings lose to the budget. Local governments need land revenue to survive. Officials need a skyline to get promoted. The short term wins. So go back to the view from the plane, that endless field of identical towers. The Soviet Union built towers to industrialize in a hurry and to make the future look like concrete. China inherited those towers. Then it kept building them for a completely different reason. Because the land underneath each one was the local government's paycheck. 1 billion people did not choose to live in the sky. They were moved there, first by a 5-year plan, and then by a tax formula, a zoning number, and a registration card. and the bill is coming due. China built somewhere between 65 and 80 million empty apartments, enough to house a mid-sized country. The old walk-ups are aging. The towers are aging faster. The birth rate is at the floor. 3 children don't fit in 2 bedrooms. The growth engine that ran on land has stalled. As the economist Michael Pettis has put it, we've seen investment-driven growth models like this before, and they tend to end the same way. When you see that skyline, you're seeing the shape of a budget, a billion lives, arranged